Afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and today on the Roundup, we're going to be answering 3 questions that we've been hearing from international educators over the last few days. And as we do each week on the Roundup, we take our themes or our questions that we answer here on Wednesdays from our newsletter that comes out on Mondays. And that newsletter is available in a couple different formats. I'm going to drop in a link to our website at smieconsulting.org/subscribe, where you can enter in your email and institutional details, and we'll get you added to our email distribution list for the newsletter. I'm also going to drop in a copy of this week's edition of the newsletter for your reference. If you like the email version, you can subscribe to it through that as well. And then I'll also put in the other way that you can subscribe, and that is if you get your international education news from LinkedIn. You can subscribe through that as well. LinkedIn is between the 2 editions of the email and the LinkedIn version. We now have over 1,850 subscribers and growing each week. Thanks to those of you who share it with your colleagues. That newsletter now is becoming an important part of international edification for international educators around the United States and around the globe, thankfully. So we really appreciate you making the newsletter a part of your international edification. So as we do each week, we take these stories from the newsletter, and the newsletter contains stories on social media and the different webinars, data reports, blogs that we find particularly interesting that relate to international education news, and then what we call our global roundup of what's happening in different countries with their education systems or international education news that impacts what they are doing in terms of policy changes or things that the governments are doing to either make it harder or easier to to attract international students to their campuses. So there's always something going on, and that roundup includes some solutions that we see, some ideas that people float for different ways to improve how we do what we do. And that's really what we are after in most of what we talk about here on the Roundup, is we try and provide solutions. And that's what the Roundup here on Wednesdays really focuses on, is solutions to the challenges we're facing here in international education in the United States. We see every day the kinds of challenges that other countries are facing in terms of their policies that their governments are implementing that really challenge the way or prohibit the way our institutions can recruit students, or barriers that they face in doing so. So what I'm in providing this information each week, we really want to make sure that the newsletter gives you our kind of hot takes on what's going on in the wider world and what you need to know as you move forward with your day-to-day. But with here on Wednesdays, we really kind of go next level with a lot of the content that we see out there, see themes developing in these news stories that we can help pass along kind of our wisdom at a deeper level on how these particular topics can be leveraged to your own benefit at your institutions. Some of it is just informational based, that it's great to be aware of what's going on in the rest of the world, and we always focus on at least one topic here on the Wednesday roundups to see how other countries are dealing with their issues related to international education and things we might be able to learn. But also just in general educational terms, it helps to know what your competition is doing. And that's something we talk about regularly on the Roundup, is the idea of perspective, having that perspective globally as to what our competition is doing or not doing or failing to do in their international education initiatives. So let's get right into our first question of the day, and that is, what are the best ways to perfect your comm strategy with international students? Now, there's a couple different levels we're going to talk about today. There's the kind of ongoing debate between what the most effective tool is to reach Gen Zs and coming up Gen Alphas in the next group, how they want to digest their information, how they use technology, and this is part of what the ever-ending battle is. Is email dead? Is social the only way to reach people, or is it a combination of social, email, web, and other digital tools that you can reach prospective students? And I would say it's the latter. It's not email is the only way, and it's not social is the only way, and it's not websites the only way. You need to have a combination of all of those different layers and strategies and multiple platforms that you need to have a presence on, because I guarantee you, every student in every country does not get their information on the same platforms in the same methods and wanting to digest it in the same way. So having a broad, robust strategy is clearly important. So what does that look like? And the two examples that I'm sharing with you today it's an ICEF Monitor article on the building blocks for a better landing page for international student recruitment. And this is important because this relates specifically to social and messaging channels. And in terms of what whenever you put a message out, there should be a corresponding call to action connected to whatever that content is that you're putting in there. So whether that's directing to an event page or a landing page on your website specifically to detail some of the questions you've posed in your post, or solutions that you say are available through your institution. So the key is in terms of what these are. And this is meant primarily for tracking purposes. You may have pages on your website that you want that are going to be go-tos, financial aid information, application information, visit information, or virtual visit information. All of these are maybe current student testimonials and that type of thing. All of those may be pre-existing pages, but the way to maximize the results of your social posts and messaging posts is to have some unique landing pages for those posts. It does require a little extra step in terms of putting these together and getting the correct URLs to drop into for a new landing page into your post, and maybe a little bit more than one person can handle, and that's where you need an IT person to help really facilitate the ease to which you want to have trackable mechanisms for determining the effectiveness of your best posts. And this is something that where this ICEF Monitor article mentions, you're doing social, having a unique landing page for those posts is important because it allows you to track and design content on that specific page. It might be an existing page that you need to do a couple of minor tweaks to tailor the message specifically for that audience. But they give 3 basic clues that they want you to look at in terms of how to design that landing page. Answer their top questions, whatever the theme is that you have identified to get your message across. Give them a hook that intrigue them with something, that a reason to come back and a reason to really explore what you're suggesting this clicking on this link will get them to. It's not clickbait. It's really giving them something to connect with, and persuade them to take an action that leads them closer to enrolling at your institution, wherever they are in that process. So the article itself talks about the different elements of what a landing page should have, what the anatomy of those are, that what benefits you need to explain, that having a video testimonial that really nails home the point that you're trying to improve, whether it's about a particular program you have somebody talking about that program, whether it's about an experience on campus, someone talking about activities, whether it's about the peer support that they receive through ambassador programs or peer mentors, whatever that is. If it's an outcomes piece, how career services help them get the job that they need, that allow them to get the internships and resume building, all of the things that are connected to that. Have someone talking about it. Those video testimonials make an impact. The peer-to-peer recruitment is an essential part of everything, or should be an essential part of everything we do in international student recruitment. And the more opportunities you're connecting your future students with your current students through their testimonials, through direct interactions on chats, whatever it is, if that's one of the posts that you have an upcoming live chat with your current students, that's going to be something that future students want to be involved in. So having those outcomes is important to share that information. Information to get rid of those that really don't need to see that content, to have those call to actions, to have a secondary call to action in case they have questions and want to learn more, to have other opportunities to talk through the various issues that they might have. So really strong article from ISEF Monitor. Definitely, if you're doing social posts with call to actions and aren't already doing this, you should. And it takes a little extra work, but it allows you to track your results better in terms of what's actually leading to the next step or call to actions being fulfilled, applying, signing up for an event, attending a virtual session, whatever it might be, or paying a deposit or enrolling, whatever it is. Having these designated landing pages is a real kickstart to what you should ultimately be trying to do. Now, the other part of this comms question is how, in terms of reaching your students, is the value of email. And to be real, email is, we all gripe about how our students don't read their emails, but the reality is it's still the most direct way to get your message into the hands of a student that isn't going to disappear as their feed goes flying by, filled with all sorts of other random posts from their friends and other celebrities that they might be following. Email is still going to be in their inbox unless they delete it. So the email that you send can and should be an essential element, not just notifying them about application status, about scholarships, about visit opportunities. Same kind of messaging that you have in your social posts, you can and should also have in your email streams, whether it does lead to a testimonial. Email should always have call to actions as well. You want your students, when they see an email, actually take an action, whatever that might be, as a result of that. And the important thing is not to overwhelm them with too much information in an email, that you need to be focused and have an email one day about X topic, an email a couple days later about another topic that's all connected to things you need to do and provide them to help move them forward down the path to enrollment. So is email still being checked? 58 data from this intl article that I've shared, email marketing still not dead. 58% of Gen Z check their email multiple times a day. 23% check it at least once a day, 12% a couple times a week, and 5% once a week. So the likelihood is greater majority, 81% are checking their email at least once a day, and oftentimes more than half are checking multiple times a day. So email is still being used by these students as much as they might say they don't. So what are some other uses of email to use for as lead magnets for target audience email list building, for incorporating strong hero images? Obviously, that's something that has really taken off in the past decade, is making sure your emails have banners that are attractive, and like your website, they incorporate the kind of and resonate. Help resonate the values that you're trying to instill in your prospective students about who you are. But also doing that with a mobile-first strategy, and that's a critical element, because you realize that students are on their phones more than anything else, that you have to have your content that is visually appealing on a phone. It's going to be different, and mobile-friendly, mobile-first strategies are really the way to go in terms of your call to action buttons in any emails that you have, and what kind of real estate those need to take up, all of that. Making your messaging personal, and this is the advantage of having CRMs that allow you to be customizable and personalize your messaging. You should be able to do this and should make this a priority beyond just first name and country and major. There are other ways to personalize that you can. Perhaps look at other ways to maybe deliver multilingual content through your email streams as well. It's a little bit next level, but it will have a huge impact if you're able to do that. And having those having interactive elements in your messaging, in your emails, that whether it's virtual campus tours, infographics on student outcomes, student life polls type of thing, animated emojis, they're just fun, eye-catching, that kind of thing. But there's some real good tips in terms of what you can and should include in email marketing that the INTED article does provide, and I certainly recommend that you make that a reading for yourself and anyone who's working on your comms team in terms of when you review your messaging, your standard CommFlow messaging for your different segments. Hopefully you have some ability to adjust those from time to time. They all should be adjusted yearly, to be honest with you, as things do change and priorities do change for students. And institutionally, there may be different messages you need to be conveying after certain events that happen on your campus. So just be thinking about that as you move forward. Now, moving into our next question. Are we headed for a perfect storm in the United States within international education circles? And two articles came up this week that made me take some time to think about it as to what this actually might mean. There was an article in University World News that from Hans de Witt, one of the longtime kind of thought leaders in the profession globally, based in the Netherlands, but has worked with Philip Altbeck at Boston College's Center for International Education, or International Higher Education, Global Education. He has made he does tend to, he's getting a little bit cranky in his old age, but he's Hans has been a thought leader for years, and I have great respect for what he's done and written about and still continues to write about. His article in University World News was International Student Recruitment. It's still complicated. And he talks a lot about how the recent challenges in Canada, UK, Australia to huge immigration flows and forcing restrictions from the government on international students as an impact of attempts to rein in the migration challenges that they have and the impacts those have on services in the country, whether it's housing, whether it's health services, whatever it might be, jobs as well. So there are challenges in terms of who we're recruiting for paying international students versus those that might be high talent but low ability to pay. There's where they're recruiting from beyond China and India. We all are obsessed with those two countries, more so India now than China. But we all have been hearing for decades that we need to diversify where our students are coming from. And we do that we don't do that at our peril in terms of putting too many eggs in one basket and such. So Hans makes the point in his article that only really the French of the major Western powers, global North powers, are the exception to the rule in terms of most of us are failing at diversifying our international student population. He makes the case that France is doing significantly more beyond China and India to broaden the scope of its student base, international student population, with 400,000 or so currently in France. And they are able to do that based on strong colonial ties to Africa, where 35 to 40% of their current international students, actually, no, I take that back. 50%, almost 50% of their current international students are coming from Africa, North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa. So, because of former colonial ties. So there's strong base there for a diverse student population. So they're not as reliant on China and India. So they have that base, and that's great. That's as a country, France is doing that, and as a whole, that's probably a strong case to make for that. He also uses the example of the Dutch that becoming more insular because of their right-wing party that currently has power, that there are limited international student enrollments. You've seen Canada do that for very different reasons. But housing issues were very similar in terms of the Dutch issue. There wasn't enough housing, so the Dutch government stepped in and said, no, we're not having. We need to limit our number of international students because we need to have. We're not going to bring them in if we can't house them. We've seen challenges up here where there wasn't that kind of regulation until recently in Canada, where housing issues became absolutely acute in certain cities, where you would have 9 international students in a 2-bedroom apartment in Toronto. And that was not an unusual circumstance. So there's many knock-on effects of these kind of flows, and each countries will handle those differently. So that's one side of it, the need for diversification. And that certainly hits home in the United States, where we know in the United States we're heavily dependent on India and China for over 50-60% of our total international students in the United States now. And we need to diversify beyond those two. There isn't another India or China out there to balance off, but as a combination of countries in a particular region in Southeast Asia, there's perhaps half of a China that we can rely on in terms of a combination of different markets there. In Latin America, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico could be a huge superpower for institutions if done right. It's a very different market, takes a lot longer to develop, but that could be a different market. Africa is being talked about as 1 billion youth in the next 10 years, and is as a market we can get into. A lot of issues in terms of recruiting from Africa at this point for U.S. and other Western powers, but that's something we need to consider. But the perfect storm piece that we're talking about actually is referencing not only the need that we need to diversify, but the article from Times Higher Ed is basically an interview. Well, not basically. It involves a lot of a conversation with Fanta Ah, current president or executive director of NAFSA. She's a former international student, worked on the ISSS side at American University, as well as other positions at the university for 20 years. And she has made the claim, and rightly so, that we need a wake-up call for U.S. colleges that have been relying on their reputation, a lot of institutions, their reputation to carry the day, rather than actively recruiting students. And actively recruiting students does require a bit of nuance, because it doesn't mean just going out blindly around the world, and it means having a focused approach to where you recruit and why you recruit in certain markets. It also means that you're not going to have budget to go everywhere, but but focusing your efforts in key markets and key cities within key markets, particularly larger countries. What Fanta is calling for is that we need to operate differently. And one of the ways we can and should operate differently is understanding what international students want. And this is something we talk about all the time here on the Roundup, is knowing that, knowing what's important to future students in terms of what's helping them make their decisions. Because right now, students around the world that in 10, 15, 20 years ago might have been applying only to the US or only to the UK, only to Canada, only to Australia, are now applying 3 or 4 different countries. Not just one country and 5 institutions within that country. They're applying to multiple institutions in multiple countries. So that's that perspective piece I talked about earlier, knowing that these students have options beyond the United States. And when they're looking at you as an institution, if you're lucky to be on their list, they're not looking at you and your competitor institution down the street or in your state. They're looking at you, maybe a couple other schools in the United States, a couple schools in the UK, a couple in Canada, maybe a couple in Australia. They are keeping their options open because there really is, the world is their oyster. They can go wherever they want, and at potentially much lower cost than it would be to come to the United States. And there are cost benefits that they have to weigh. So it all will depend on you as an institution knowing not just your own institutional strengths, but your country's strengths as a whole. Why do students want and should come to the United States? Because of the quality, because of the culture, because of the diversity, because of the opportunities after graduation. But also knowing that in those students' decisions, outcomes have become much more important since the pandemic. What is the parents' return on investment going to be for investing $250,000 or more on their son or daughter's education at the undergraduate level? Are you able to articulate that specifically for international students, and ideally specifically for students coming from their country at the level of study that they're looking at? Maybe even in their major someday, you have that kind of granularity of content and information that you can provide. But you got to have something that addresses that outcomes and ROI piece, because they want that. Not just knowing that you're a quality place, you're a great environment and all of that, but the development of helping them, equip them with the skills they need to be successful no matter what they field that they choose, whether it's further graduate education, employment in the United States, or preparing them to go back home and be successful. All of that is part of your responsibility now, and that's what Fanta's talking about in terms of that wake-up call, that you can't just be throwing out the same old stuff you send to your domestic students to your international audiences. It needs to be specific to them. And if you can't do that, you might as well not even start, because you'll shoot yourself in the foot otherwise. Now let's go to our last question of the day, and this is one that has everything to do, speaking of shooting yourselves in the foot. Looks like the UK may have just dodged a very significant bullet. We know, if you follow the roundup here for the last couple of years, you know what has been coming in the UK. They've already seen the effects of some government policy changes this past year that eliminated dependent visas for students who are not pursuing doctoral programs, where you would have tens of thousands of family members accompanying students who are coming from master's degree programs or one-year programs come and enter the UK as dependents of a student, and that has led to significant impacts on national health, on housing, and various other issues in the UK. And so that was changed, and there was a dependent study ban. So no longer, as of January 1st, can dependents of non-doctoral students come with them to study in the UK. So that has had a very negative impact on UK international applications, on where the students are coming from. Nigeria, India, which are two of their top 5 markets, have seen huge drop-offs, because that's where the majority of those coming for one-year master's programs with dependents were coming from. So they've seen huge drop-offs there. And now we're also seeing there was a threat that there would be further restrictions to international students in the UK by means of cutting or reducing the graduate route visa, which is the kind of our post-study work in the United States for LPT. It's currently at 2 years, and there was consideration it might be cut back down to 6 months, like it was back in Theresa May's day. But that just yesterday, that was the Migration Advisory Committee that the Education Department had convened, has released a report that says that international students do not abuse the graduate route visa system for post-study work. So that's a huge sigh of relief for my colleagues across the pond, and I'm sure they're all celebrating quietly or loudly over that decision, and hopefully there aren't any more bumps, because they've had a rough 6 months or so with this change with the dependent study visa ban and the challenges they've had with housing in certain markets. There were schools that were telling students in Scotland, if you don't have housing arranged before you come, even if you already have a visa, don't come, because we don't want you coming into a situation where you won't have housing. Hopefully this is going to give them some momentum to start addressing those issues. We've talked about that here on the roundup before, about how in the U.S. we really don't have as significant a challenge with those housing issues, because our campuses are built to accommodate international students and students who live on campus, whereas most institutions around the world, with few exceptions, don't have significant on-campus housing, if any. So it puts the burden on the local communities to absorb those students and find appropriate housing, which creates other layers of complexity that they don't need. So this is what we have for you this week on the Roundup. Thanks for making us a part of your weekly international edification. For those that watch live, thank you for being on. Appreciate it. And for those that are watching on repeat on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook, or listening to the audio-only podcast available on all your favorite podcast providers, thank you for including us in your international edification. Until next week, have a great time. Cheers.